Hey everyone, tonight we will step together into a world that is grim, dangerous, and utterly devoid of glamour. A world where medieval assassins crept through castle halls and dark alleys, silently changing history with a single blade and a whisper. Hollywood might make them look cool, mysterious, but the truth is, being a medieval assassin was a terrible job. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly connect with what we're doing here. And if you can, let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? It's always fascinating to know we have friends from all over the world joining this nightly journey. Now then, dim your lights a little. Maybe turn on a fan for a soft, humming background noise. And together, let's begin. Let's be perfectly clear about one thing. No one in the Middle Ages woke up in the morning and thought, today I'd like to stab a nobleman in the throat for 12 silver coins and earn the honor of hiding in a garbage bin for 3 days. Becoming an assassin was not a career path. No one planned their life to, at 30, become a shadow in a dark alley, knife in hand, peeking through the crack of someone else's door. It wasn't a dream. It was a consequence. Just as you never planned to be betrayed, to lose all honor, to starve to death, but life just pushes you there. And then suddenly, you find yourself accepting a small pouch of coins, along with a name and a whisper. Just make it clean. Leave no trace. You didn't choose to become an assassin. You simply had no other choices left. The truth is, there's nothing cool about it. No magnificent cloaks billowing in the wind. No ninja techniques for walking on rooftops under a full moon. No secret brotherhood. No noble creed to follow. There was only a person, hungry, trembling, perhaps sleeping in a pile of rotten straw, holding an old, worn-out knife, ready to do the one thing no one else wanted to do. That person might have once been a soldier, once a farmer, once someone with a name, an age. Now, all that remained was a shadow gliding across a damp brick wall. You think this was a way to make quick money? Perhaps. But the price was everything else. Identity, family, future, and sometimes your very soul. A medieval assassin had no days off. No one knew who they were. And if someone did know, that person was either about to die or was the one who would kill them to tie up loose ends. You didn't live in the shadows. You were consumed by the shadows, bit by bit, every single night. So tonight, if you're still awake, try closing your eyes and imagine you're not living in an action movie. You are free-falling into a world where no one has a real name, and every breath could be your last. You are not the hero. You are an ink stain, smeared and erased from a history book that no one wants to read again. No, not everyone was born to hold a knife. For most of them, their hands were made to hold a hoe, a hammer, a holy book, or to hold another's hand on a quiet afternoon. But life, especially life in the Middle Ages, doesn't ask what you want. It simply throws you into a deep, cold pit. And if you're lucky enough, or unlucky enough, to survive, you have to climb out using whatever you can cling to. Even if that thing is a blade plunged into someone else's neck. You didn't become an assassin because you wanted to. You became an assassin because there was nothing else for you to become. Try taking a walk around any medieval town. Amidst the dust, the smell of horse manure, and the distant church bells, there were always lurking figures. They were the people society had cast aside, the names no one wanted to remember anymore. Over there might be a soldier. He once fought for a king, once heard the cheers of a crowd. Now, the war is over, or he's lost too many fingers to hold a sword properly. He was discarded, left with only nightmares and a single skill: taking human lives. In this street corner, there might be a farmer. He once had a plot of land, a family. But then the crops failed, the land froze over, and the plague took his wife and children. He was driven from his home simply because he couldn't pay enough taxes to a well-fed lord in a fur coat. Now, he has nothing but calloused hands and an empty heart. And then there were those who had never been anyone at all. They were born into poverty, nameless, rightless, without a single happy memory to lose. So when someone offered a few silver coins in exchange for a life, they didn't see much difference from killing a chicken for dinner. There was a saying, whispered in the grimiest of taverns, a grim truth. If you wake up in the morning and you still own a goat that has a name, you haven't yet reached the point where you have to kill for a living. That saying wasn't meant to be funny. It was terrifyingly accurate. To own something, no matter how small, meant you still had a choice. To have nothing at all meant you only had one path left. And that path often began with a piece of parchment hastily shoved into your hand. On it, a name, an address, and a chilling instruction. Make it clean. Once you accepted that piece of parchment, your world began to dissolve. Friends were gone. Family became a distant pain. Home was only a memory. You became a tool, a walking blade, a ghost paid to create other ghosts. And sometimes, it wasn't you who found this line of work. It was the work that found you. Imagine this. You're starving. You sneak into a warehouse, hoping to find a stale piece of bread. But inside, you find a city guard assaulting a young woman. You don't think. Rage and desperation make you swing the only thing you have, a rusty knife. The man falls. The next morning, as you're huddled in an alley corner, a strange man taps you on the shoulder. He doesn't ask. He just says, "I saw what you did last night. Clean work. Want more?" And just like that, you've been recruited without ever submitting an application. Some became assassins to pay an unpayable debt. Some did it out of betrayal, having lost all honor and wanting to drag the world down into the mud with them. Some were falsely accused, hunted, and finally realized the only way to survive was to become the very monster people called them. And then there were those who killed by mistake just once, then had to kill again to silence a witness, and again, just to survive. A chain of sin that began with an accident and whose end would never come. You didn't need a noble lineage to become a murderer. You just needed a society rotten enough to push you off the edge. And so, over the years, that nameless person, once a soldier, a father, a student, once a child who dreamt under the sun, gradually transformed into something people only dared to whisper about in the dark. No one is born to be an assassin, but history, in its cruelty, has given birth to thousands of them. If, right now, a thought is creeping into your mind, well, at least an assassin has money, some underground power, a bit of a reputation in the world of shadows, then stop. Just stop. The profession of a medieval assassin came with no insurance, no union, and certainly no holidays. No one celebrated your birthday. No one knew you existed. And if someone did know, they were either about to die or they would cause you to die. This was the only job in the world where, if you were recognized for it, you would be executed on the spot. You lived without identification papers, no registered address, no home, no savings account. The only thing you could keep for a long time were scars. No one would look at you and say, "Oh, that's the infamous cutthroat from the west side of the castle." No. People looked at you as if you were a ghost, someone whose name should not be asked, who should not be spoken to, and who was best to be avoided. You were not a hero, nor were you a villain. You were just a rumor. No one would erect a statue of you. No one would write a book about you. No one would carve your name on a tombstone, simply because you wouldn't have a grave. You would die in a forest, in a ditch, in a manure pit behind a stable, or on a guard's torture rack, with no one even remembering what your real name was. You lived by lies, and you died in silence. Do you think that after 30 years in the business, you could retire to the suburbs, raise chickens, drink plum wine, and tell old stories to the children? No chance. You didn't have a last day of work. You only had a last day. And usually, it came without you having a chance to say goodbye to anyone. As an assassin, you had no future. You only had escape plans for each night. The money you earned wasn't invested. It wasn't deposited in a bank. You hid it under a rock, in a hollow tree, behind an unmarked grave, and often lost it all when you had to flee in a hurry. You couldn't live where you liked. You had to live where no one could find you. Perhaps it was a squalid rented room with moldy walls and a secret exit behind the kitchen. Every time there was a knock on the door, your heart would seize. You wouldn't know if it was the landlord demanding rent, or death coming to find you sooner than expected. You learned not to make friends, not to love anyone, never to share secrets, because all of those things were weaknesses. Have you ever tried lying on a cold rooftop, under a downpour, your stomach aching with hunger, clutching a rusty knife, and asking yourself, "Will I still be alive tomorrow?" If the answer is yes, then congratulations. You have just experienced a completely normal night for a medieval assassin. And if you still think there's something cool about this profession, then remember this. A true assassin, when they die, leaves nothing behind, except for a bloodstain. No one mourns. No one writes an obituary. Not a single story is retold. There is only the wind, blowing through the place where you once existed. There were no schools that taught you to become an assassin. No Hogwarts for the assassination and backstabbing arts. No textbook titled How to Kill People and Not Be Disliked. Everything you learned from fear, from hunger, and from your first near-death experience. If you survived that, congratulations. You had graduated. For some, their only foundation was the battlefield. Having wielded a sword, having known the feeling of blood splashing on their face as they cut down an enemy, they at least had what could be called work experience. As for the rest, they learned from rats, learned how they scurried through holes, how they avoided a cat's pounce, how they scavenged for scraps, and most importantly, learned when to run without ever looking back. No one stood in a classroom to lecture you. When assassinating, aim for the throat to prevent the victim from screaming. If the deed is done in a church, hide the knife in a Bible. And if you are caught, never, ever reveal the name of your employer, because that way, you might at least have a chance at a quicker death. No. Those things you only learned after nearly being dragged to the pyre for accidentally spilling a priest's wine. One day, you might follow an older assassin to learn his tricks. The next day, you find his body in a well, his head not fully intact. The lesson? Never learn from someone who is still alive. Because if they are alive, they are still hiding a secret. You learn by trial and error. And each error cost you a broken bone, a misplaced stab wound, or a lung that you thought had stopped breathing. You learn to climb walls with your bare hands, and you might break your neck if you chose the wrong handhold. You learn to sneak through a door, and you might be torn apart by a dog if you timed it wrong. You learned with blood, not with ink. And above all, you learned to be invisible. No one would ever say, "I am a professional assassin. Let me show you a few moves." The only person who would approach you was often the last person you should ever trust. Some romantics might imagine that assassins were trained in secret monasteries, their skills honed by masters under the silver moonlight. The truth? You learned how to assassinate while your stomach was growling with hunger, walking barefoot on the cold, hard ground, your hands trembling from the cold, and your gut churning because you had just tried eating a strange mushroom to see if it was poisonous. Instead of supreme martial arts, you used a dried cat's intestine to measure the height of a guard from a distance. Instead of a secret family manual, you used a stick to draw the layout of a castle in the sand, then quickly erased it before anyone could see. You had no mentor, no colleagues, no fellow disciples. There was only you and the darkness, you and your dull knife, and the question that repeated over and over in your head, will I be lucky enough to survive the next time? That was how you learned the trade in the Middle Ages. No one handed you a diploma. If you were still alive after your 10th assassination without being caught, then congratulations, you were a true assassin. And if not, then you had become a lesson for someone else, someone who was silently picking up the knife that had just fallen from your hand. Don't fantasize. No one equipped you with a Damascus steel dagger engraved with a dragon. There were no shining throwing stars, no smoke bombs, no ropes made of spider silk, or an invisibility cloak. What you had was trash. What you used to kill people were the things that others had thrown away. Your knife? It wasn't sharp. It might have once been a monk's shaving razor. Then it fell into the hands of a beggar. And finally, it was your turn to pick it up from a garbage heap. The blade was rusty. The handle was loose. But you learned to hold it as if you were holding your entire life in your hands. Because, in fact, you were. Your most secret weapon was sometimes not a blade, but an old piece of rope used to tie bread. It wasn't sturdy, but if wrapped around someone's neck quickly and unexpectedly enough, it still did the job. What about a chicken claw? Just a piece of garbage. But if a chicken claw was sharpened enough and coated with a poison extracted from toad skin, it could also send a person to their maker without anyone having time to wonder why. A vial of poison? No. You didn't have such a luxury. You only had a cracked clay pot, inside which was a dark, viscous liquid squeezed from wild mushrooms, rotten tree roots, and, if you were lucky, a bit of urine from a dog that had just eaten a corpse. Sound disgusting? It was. But when cornered, one no longer has the luxury of choosing scents. Armor. That was for knights, not for someone who lived in the gutter. You only had an old, tattered cloak that smelled of mold. It was enough to hide a sharpened piece of wood you always carried, disguised as a walking stick. One strike to the right spot, the victim's neck would break. One strike off the mark, and it might be your own arm that broke. Your shoes. Sometimes they were just two pieces of burlap tied with rope. They helped you move quietly, softly, and they were freezing cold in the winter. Your toolkit consisted of only a few simple items: a piece of dry bread so you wouldn't starve to death midway, a pebble sharpened at one end, and a hollow chicken bone filled with kitchen ash mixed with pepper powder to be blown into an enemy's eyes when needed. That was it. Nothing more. It was said that there was once an assassin who killed a man with just a spoon. Not because he was cool, but because it was the only thing left in his hand after all other plans had failed. You didn't choose your weapon based on the criterion, "This one is the strongest." You chose based on the criterion, "This one is light, easy to hide, and if I get caught, it's not enough to constitute a crime that would get me hanged." A dragon-engraved dagger might make you look like the main character of a fairy tale, but it would also become undeniable evidence against you. You were not a ninja. You were the one who picked up a rusty keychain to sharpen into a blade. You were the one who gathered bird feathers to pretend it was a pen and then used it to stab a gatekeeper in the neck. Every tool you used was not for showing off. It was for survival. That was the arsenal of a medieval assassin. Not sleek, not impressive, no swoosh sound cutting through the wind. Only the sound of a soft breath, the sound of dull metal hitting bone, and the musty smell of a long night about to begin. If you think that a medieval assassin was hired to take care of a noisy neighbor or a cheating candle maker, you're dreaming again. No one paid for petty revenge. The person who hired you didn't need justice. They needed a result. Quick, clean, and without a trace. And the target you were assigned was always someone who shouldn't, couldn't, and no one else dared to touch. Not the drunkard at the tavern, not the mumbling old witch at the edge of the village, but rather a powerful bishop, a wealthy lord, or someone who had already survived 3 previous assassination attempts. Your target always possessed things you did not have: high walls, guards, vigilance, and sometimes a dog more ferocious than the person who hired you. Killing a nobleman was not like drawing a knife in a dark alley. They never walked alone. They never sat in an exposed place. And if they did, they were surrounded by a forest of eyes watching them. From the maid, the bodyguard, to the candle holder. Once, an assassin infiltrated a banquet, disguised as a musician. He waited for the loudest moment to strike. The result? He stabbed the person holding the target's wine glass by mistake, and he himself was caught, hung upside down over a fire, and became the main course of that very feast. The hardest part was not the act of killing. The hardest part was getting close. A man in armor, sitting on a throne, surrounded by 6 soldiers and 2 locked doors. You couldn't just knock and say, "My lord, I've come from hell to ask for your throat." You had to think like a termite, crawl through the cracks, wait for the right stormy night, choose the exact moment the church bells rang, and strike. You only had one chance. A single moment, existing between 2 breaths, between a note of music, between the sound of the wind howling through the cold stone corridor. Kill and vanish. Often, The person who hired you was the victim's own brother, second wife, or closest advisor. You were just a tool, a lever, a sudden accident in a game of power. The person you kill today might be the one the public will erect a statue for tomorrow. You are not the one who writes history. You are the one who is erased from history, along with your victim. No one hired you to do an easy job. If it were easy, they would have done it themselves. You were hired because you were willing to die, because only someone with nothing left to lose would dare to kill someone who had everything. You couldn't just walk into a castle, draw your knife, and shout, "For the glory of the Brotherhood of Shadows." That was the quickest way to be cut in half by a guard or torn into 3 pieces by a hound. In this profession, the act of killing was only Act 2. Act 1, the much more important part, was to become invisible. Not magically invisible, but to transform into someone so ordinary that no one would even bother to look at you. A blind monk, a coal seller, a one-legged beggar, or a manure hauler with tattered clothes and an equally tattered dignity. All of these were skins you had to wear. They were masks, not to hide, but to dissolve into the crowd, to disappear from memory. A good assassin was not the one who struck the fastest. It was the one whose face no one could remember ever seeing. You learned to walk with a stoop like a hunchback. You learned to stutter like a fool. You learned to smell filth without flinching, because today you were the one pushing the manure cart through the market. An old cloak, a fake beard made from dog hair, a little urine smeared on yourself to avoid being sniffed out by hunting dogs. Every small detail was a matter of life and death. Because if someone looked at you for just a moment too long, you had failed. Disguise, if not done perfectly, was not armor. It was a coffin made of rags. There was no choosing your costume. There was only a pile of rags and an imagination fueled by desperation. Who were you today? It depended on the place and on the target. You could be a poor monk begging for porridge, or a reaper who had lost an arm. As long as people glanced at you and then immediately forgot you, you had succeeded. Sometimes you had to lie still under a banquet table for 6 hours just to overhear a name. Sometimes you had to pretend to be a floating corpse, soaking in a filthy ditch all night, just for the chance to climb ashore at the exact moment the guards changed shifts. The danger of this profession was not in the blade. It was in the eyes of others. Just one look that was too confident, a posture that was too straight, or a breath that didn't tremble when being insulted, and you would be exposed. You had to live like a shadow, move like an insect, and speak like a madman, because that was the only way to survive. And at the highest level of disguise, you were no longer a person playing a role. You were the role itself. You were so immersed in it for so long that sometimes you forgot who you really were. In games, you have a guild. In stories, you have a master. In movies, you have a brotherhood of shadows, training together in the misty mountains and burning incense on peaks. But in real medieval life, you only had yourself. No one to guide you. No one to watch your back. Not a single person would come to your rescue if you slipped and fell into the castle's latrine pit. An assassin was a solitary creature. Good people feared you. Bad people also feared you. Because you were a living witness, a person who carried secrets in the night, and who could topple everything with a single word. if you were still alive to speak it. Even the person who hired you, once the job was done, the first thing they thought about was how to silence you. With money, if you were lucky. With a blade, if you were naive. You killed for them, and they would kill you to clean up the mess. There were no contracts, no lawyers, only a verbal promise, exchanged in the dark between a desperate person and someone who wanted to hide their crimes. You dealt in silence. Money was hidden in a rock crevice. Messages were written with a code only two people understood, and you could never be sure. Was the meeting place for payment a trap? Was there a noose attached to the money pouch? Was there an arrow waiting for you behind that wall? Surviving the assassination did not mean victory, because the real danger only began after your blade left the victim's throat. You were not allowed to trust anyone. Trust a friend, you would die. Believe that this life has value, you would die. Believe that you could retire after one big job, you would die sooner, and probably not in one piece. There were no taverns for old assassins to tell their stories. No one called you a silent hero. If you tried to keep in touch with another person in the trade, sooner or later, one of you would have to make a choice. Strike first or be struck from behind. You lived a life where your name had to be forgotten as quickly as possible. Anyone who knew who you were was a threat. An assassin had no family. If you ever had one, you wouldn't have chosen this path. And if you happened to have someone to care for, you had to leave them. Because every name, every memory, every feeling of longing was a spark that could burn you to the ground at any moment. You lived like a shadow. And then one day, you died in silence. No one knew. No one asked. There was only the sound of the night wind, blowing through the narrow alley where a stranger had once lived a whole life without anyone ever seeing their face clearly. In most other professions, you are allowed to make mistakes. A carpenter who misaligns a plank can redo it. A wine seller who breaks a jug can apologize. A priest who yawns during a sermon can recite a few more prayers. But if you are an assassin, a slip of the hand is death. A cough at the wrong time is death. Tripping over a brick while sneaking through a corridor is still death, but perhaps slower and more painful. There are no second chances, no opportunity to correct your mistakes. There is only immediate and merciless retribution. And sometimes, a quick death is the kindest gift. When you fail, you often don't die right away. They will capture you, tie you up, and drag you to the town square. You are hung up, displayed before the crowd like a living lesson for the entire town. You become free entertainment for children to throw stones at, for women to curse, for the priest to read the last rites when your body has already been half consumed by flames. Your failure is the victory of others. The guard gets a reward. The bishop is applauded. The king has an opportunity to demonstrate the severity of his justice. And you? You get to be flayed, or at least have a confession extracted with red-hot pincers. Even worse, sometimes failure is not because you are incompetent. It's simply because a dog barked at the wrong moment. A guard happened to turn back because he forgot his lantern. Or your own dry cough in the dead of night was enough to awaken an entire castle. You don't have to kill the wrong person to be executed. Just being in the wrong place, being seen, or leaving a footprint in the mud is enough to get you tied to the stake. And do you know what the worst part is? It's that sometimes you did everything right. killed the target, escaped successfully. But the person who hired you decides that the best way to erase the traces is to erase you as well. And you are killed simply because you are too good at your job. There are no medals for assassins, only an unmarked grave, if you're lucky, or ashes clinging to the shoes of some passerby who happens to step on the place where you once existed. People tell stories about failed assassins like ghost stories, that someone was roasted for 3 days and 3 nights and was still twitching, that someone was still alive after being flayed, and so was canonized in reverse by the villagers. You might become a legend, but not in the way you would want. An assassin has no right to apologize. They can only die, tied up, with a gag in their mouth, and their blood becoming the decoration for their ceremony of justice. While the crowd cheers and calls it fairness, you have killed the target. The blade has completed its journey. The blood has flowed. The last breath has faded. The entire castle has not even had time to realize that an important figure has just fallen to the ground like a sack of grain, and you have succeeded. Congratulations? No. There is no round of applause, no slow motion scene with an epic soundtrack, or a beautiful maiden waiting under a porch. There is only you, drenched in cold sweat, your heart pounding in your chest, and a single command in your mind: run. After the kill, the first thing is to disappear. Shave your beard, change your clothes, burn your shoes, leave behind everything you have ever touched, and never, ever look back. You are not allowed to be proud, because the very shadow of pride will expose you. Do you know what the real reward for a successful mission is? It's not being recognized. It's when people don't mention your name. It's when the whole village buzzes with rumors that the victim died of a heart attack or was accidentally bitten in the throat by a rabid dog. Your success is perfect silence. The fewer people who know, the more chances you have to live. You can't go home. You can't tell anyone. You can't drink a toast to your success, because the tavern has ears. The baker has a gossiping mouth. The cup you touched with your lips today could become the evidence that condemns you tomorrow. A successful assassin is one who knows how to evaporate, leaving no reputation, no mementos. No one even has to ask the question, who did this? Success doesn't turn you into a legend. It just turns you into someone who must constantly change their name, their face, their voice. It makes you even more lonely. Because the more successful missions you carry out, the more you become someone who knows too much. And in the world of blood and betrayal, knowing too much is synonymous with death. You have no right to rest. No one tells you, "Good job, buddy." There's only the next mission, or a life on the run with no end in sight. Perhaps you will grow old with a pile of money you can never spend, because even just going to the market to buy some onions is enough to make you terrified of being recognized. Perhaps you will die of old age on a straw bed, alone, craving to hear someone call your name, even if it's a fake one. But no one will call. And then, your name, which was never real to begin with, will be carried away by the wind. No one will remember you ever existed. No one will know you once changed the fate of an entire kingdom with a single stab. You are a void. No legacy, no heir, nothing at all. You are not a demon. You are not a witch. You are just a human being, very real, very hungry, and still breathing. But you have lived so close to the edge of death that people no longer know what to call you. And in the Middle Ages, anything that could not be explained was considered evil. You walk through the market, silent, your head bowed. No one knows who you are. But an old woman saw you bend down to pick up a crow's feather from the ground. She whispers to the person next to her, "That one is gathering ingredients for a spell." 3 days later, a fire of unknown origin breaks out behind the old woman's house. No one needs to investigate. Everyone believes it was your curse. You once caught a frog and stuffed it in your pocket simply because it was more filling than eating leaves. But in a village steeped in superstition, a nameless, homeless man, walking barefoot and carrying a frog. He could only be a warlock, a demon in disguise, someone who could open the gates of hell with a single glance. No one has ever seen you kill anyone, but rumors are always more powerful than the truth. That night, my dog howled 3 times and then went silent. It must have been him. My aunt dreamed of blood in the well. It must be an omen about him. You gradually become the cause of all misfortunes. A chicken dies. The crops fail. The head of the saint statue in the church falls off, and even the strange smell in the September wind. You see a child fall. You help them up. They smile at you. The mother runs over, not to thank you, but to scream, "Don't touch my child. He will die young." You live in alleys where even the rats know to avoid you. People draw symbols with mud on your door as a warning to children to stay away. You once survived a plague. Was it a miracle? No. It was proof that you were not human. In a world where everything needed an explanation, anyone who lived differently was considered dangerous. You know a type of mushroom that can make a person dizzy for 3 days. You used it to take down someone no one dared to touch. You told no one. But the villagers saw the victim die with a twisted smile. From then on, your smile was also considered a sign of death. You are no longer just an assassin. You are a whisper passed down through generations. The darkness behind the curtain. The reason why children are not allowed to go out at night. And then one day, you are captured. Not for the crime of murder, but because someone dreamed that you turned into a crow. You are dragged to the town square. A priest shouts, "He is a servant of the devil." The crowd roars. No one needs evidence. They just need a reason to burn away their fears. And you, coincidentally, are that reason. You are tied to a wooden stake. At your feet is dry straw. Above you are hundreds of angry eyes. You do not scream, because you know that if you open your mouth, they will believe you are chanting a spell. The fire ignites. It does not just burn your body. It burns away everything that they fear and cannot understand. You might survive 12 assassinations, but you cannot survive a rumor. And if you are not killed, not burned alive, not hanged, if you have survived, not because you are skilled, but because you are resilient, not because someone saved you, but simply because it wasn't your turn to be killed yet. Then your life will also end, not with a loud bang, but with a long sigh. In a dilapidated old hut at the edge of a forest, it is raining. Your stomach is empty. A stray dog is perhaps the only witness to your death. You are not the main character in any chronicle. Your name is not in the royal archives, not carved in stone, not passed down in legend. The only person who ever called you by your real name was probably your mother, and she passed away a long time ago. No one will bury you. There is only the earth, the rain, and time. Your bones will merge with the mud. Your hair will rot under the roots of a tree. No grave, no candles, no one to mourn. Many years later, in a nearby village, a child might ask their grandfather, "Grandpa, is it true that long ago there were people who killed in silence?" The old man will shake his head. That's just something from ghost stories to scare children. Then he will forget the question. And you were forgotten a long time ago. Sometimes, in your final dreams, you don't dream of the people you killed. You dream of the last meal you had with your family, the laughter you no longer hear, the smell of the turnip porridge your mother used to make, the small, simple things that, in a lifetime, as an assassin, you could never have again. You lived under false names, like Hans, Gideon, or Ronan the Faceless. But death does not call you by any name. It comes silently, just as you once came for others. Quick, clean, without a single goodbye. No legacy, no disciples, nothing but disappearance. You are an erasure mark on the page of history, a blank space between the lines written in blood and power. Not a villain, nor a hero. Not a legend, nor a curse. You are just the silence between two screams. If anyone ever remembers you, it is only as a sudden cold wind blowing through a castle corridor at midnight, making a guard shiver for no reason. A dark figure someone glimpses in the corner of their eye, and when they turn, there is nothing there. A vague story passed around in a tavern that there was once someone who lived like death and died as if they had never lived at all. You did not change history. You were erased by history, slowly, silently, and without a trace of mercy. And that is where our story ends. Not with a round of applause, but with absolute silence. Not everyone who lives in the darkness is evil, and not everyone who walks in the light will be remembered. To be a medieval assassin was not to live a quiet life. It was to be swallowed by the quiet itself, bit by bit, with every breath, until you yourself no longer knew who you were. You were not a legend. You were the wind that slipped through a decaying roof, the footstep that made no sound on the cold stone floor, a story that was never fully told. And perhaps that was the price for living too close to the line between human and demon, between life and death, between a name and oblivion. You did not change history. You were erased by history, slowly, silently, just like the profession you never chose, but lived with until your very last breath. But not everyone who lives in the darkness is nameless. There are those who, despite walking a blood-soaked path, still have their names carved into history in gold, in fire, and in the hatred of generations. Because on the other side of the nameless ghosts, there are women who tore down the limits set by men, without a dagger, without the cover of night, only with power in their hands and a heart that knew no fear. Tomorrow night, when you once again seek sleep, let me tell you about a mother, a queen, a figure both terrifying and tragic, the one who created a legend named Alexander the Great. But history calls her Olympia's not everyone born in blood, ambition, and the whispers of vipers becomes a monster. But if there was one person, just one, who made ancient men both lustful and terrified, who ultimately swallowed them whole, it was Olympias, A woman who didn't carve history with a sword, but with her womb. She didn't write history in ink. She etched it in blood, the blood of others. Olympias was born around 375 BCE in a place where gods and politics often shared the same bed, the kingdom of Epirus, a forest-cloaked corner of Illyria, where wolves howled to summon the night. Her father was a king, her mother, a noble woman, and she, since the day she was born, was never ordinary. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because she was brilliant, undoubtedly, but because, from an early age, she knew that a gaze could kill and a prayer could curse. In a land where bloodlines carried prophecy, she wasn't just a princess. She was something else. Half human, half myth. No one is certain what her real name was. Olympias was a name bestowed later, like a title, a halo soaked in blood. As a child, she was called Polyxena, a name echoing from epic tales. A bit older, she became Myrtle, like the scent of laurel, subtle but dangerous. But it was her husband's Olympic victory, fateful and strategic, that crowned her as Olympias. From then on, she was no longer just a princess, no longer merely a queen. She was a living emblem of victory, and an omen history couldn't forget. No one simply becomes the mother of a world conqueror. Before Alexander was born, Olympias had already learned how to behead serpents with a glance and inject venom into a smile. She lived in a world ruled by men, but where women decided, in the shadows, who lived and who died. In ancient times, women didn't wield swords, but they could speak a single word, and 1,000 blades would be drawn in their name. Olympias didn't shape history with her own hands. She shaped it through those she bent to her will. Kings, princes, even gods. No one truly married Olympias. They merely signed their own death warrant. When she was just of age, old enough to be given away like a diplomatic gift, Macedonia was expanding like a beast scenting fresh meat. King Philip II, a man with one eye but 3 times the ambition, set his sights on her, not out of love, but out of politics. And like many powerful men, he believed he could control a woman with eyes as deep as an abyss. The wedding happened in 357 BCE. Like all royal marriages of that era, no flowers, no love songs, only blood, oaths, and wine. Olympias entered the Macedonian palace not as a bride, but as a serpent in a basket of silk. She was a foreigner among blue-eyed nobles, in a court used to soft-spoken, obedient women who knew how to smile and die quietly. Olympias didn't smile. She watched and waited. The palace disliked her. She never pretended to care. Rumors swirled about her strange rituals from Epirus. Animal blood poured on idols. Her sleeping among snakes, calling them her brothers. Perhaps it was gossip. But gossip, whispered long enough, becomes sharper than steel. Even Philip, the one-eyed king, began to feel uneasy. They had a son. No one knows what Olympias whispered to the gods that night, what she burned in the brazier, or whether she slipped a serpent beneath the sheets. But when Alexander cried his first cry, a lightning bolt was said to strike the temple. A prophet shouted in his sleep, "A being who will split the world in two has just been born." Olympias whispered to her baby, "You are mine, not the world's. I gave you life. I decide whether you'll be God or monster." That wasn't a lullaby. It was a curse, cloaked in motherly love. History remembers kings, but it quietly forgets the women who molded them from mud, blood, and beautiful lies. Alexander was not raised to believe he was the son of a man. No, at least not according to his mother. Olympias would stand before a bronze mirror, stroke her son's hair, and whisper, "You are not human. You are the son of Zeus, a lightning bolt wearing armor." And Alexander believed her, not because she was convincing, but because she was the only person he never dared to doubt. Olympias did not raise her son on milk. She raised him on destiny. Before he could spell his name, he knew. The world was spoils of war. Gods answered when called by name. And his mother alone decided when his father should die. Yes, Olympias taught her son to see his father as an obstacle. Philip, once king, became just a shadow in the hallway, while the real darkness stood behind the curtain, in a dress with a soft smile. They called her cruel, but who among them had ever raised a child prophesied to walk across the earth like a mythical storm? You don't raise a child like that with bread and fish. You raise him with legends. Olympias didn't need a knife. She killed Philip with presence alone. As Alexander grew, Philip realized the crown no longer belonged to him, and that boy eating an apple might one day devour both him and the world. One day, Alexander left home. Olympias stood at the gate. No tears, no hugs, just one sentence. Don't forget, you were born of darkness. When the world trembles beneath your feet, know that I am smiling. And then the boy, named the Great, went to conquer the world. Amid cheers, blood, and gold, no one noticed. The long shadow of a mother silently following. No one truly knows who killed Philip, but everyone knows who didn't cry. 336 BCE. A beautiful day. Philip, king of Macedonia, the one-eyed man who saw farther than those with two, stepped out of the grand hall for his daughter's wedding. A guard lunged. A single stab. No scream. No alarm. Just a king collapsing onto stone, blood flowing like wine, in front of 1,000 eyes. The assassin was slain immediately. No questioning. No trial. No one probed further. And no one dared mention the woman in a black dress standing at the window, sipping tea as if nothing had happened. Olympias didn't have to lift a finger. She simply waited. She was the first to enter the chamber where Philip's body lay. No tears, no trembling. She looked at the man who was once her husband, and maybe once dared to threaten her child, with the same look you'd give a stain on a white tablecloth. No one proved she was behind it. No one asked. Because in the palace, death wasn't feared. It was the silence after death, when you turned your back and saw Olympias still standing there. Days later, Alexander was crowned, and she, of course, did not become official queen, because true power doesn't need a throne. She became Mother of the King, a title as soft as silk, yet heavier than any sword. One by one, those who opposed Alexander disappeared. Enemies of her bloodline lost power, heads, or simply vanished. Olympias didn't kill like an assassin. She erased like ink wiped from parchment. And when whispers arose, did she kill her husband? She smiled and answered just once. I didn't have to kill him. A man who forgets he married a lioness will die the moment he opens the cage. History remembers Alexander, his conquests, his marble statues, his empire torn across the map by horse hooves. But it forgets one thing: who stitched his soul from scraps. Olympias didn't follow him to war. She didn't need to. She stayed in Pella, the kingdom's heart, where real power lived in whispers and handwritten letters. Each morning, she didn't watch the sun. She studied maps. Letters were sent in trembling hands with cold serpent ink. They were not blessings, not family news, only reminders. Don't forget, you are not human. Each time you spare an enemy, you betray divine blood, and me. The farther Alexander marched, to the east, across deserts, beyond the Indus, the louder her voice whispered in his mind. People thought he was mad, calling himself son of Zeus. He wasn't. He was simply a loyal son of a masterful storyteller. Olympias didn't need horses or arrows. She fired will like poison darts. She conquered faith like a fire in the night. Soon, the world began to whisper about her, not by name, but in nicknames, whispered after supper: the Witch of Macedonia, the Mother of Flame, the purple-clad demon. But no one dared write them down, because paper can burn, but Olympias could not. Alexander didn't die on the battlefield, not by sword, betrayal, or disaster. He died in a palace in Babylon, among music, wine, and eyes that never told the truth. They say he fell ill, fever, delirium, muttering his mother's name. They also say he was poisoned. And Olympias, when she received the news, she didn't cry, didn't scream. She stood and calmly snuffed out the candle in her room. So, my son is no longer mortal. Good. An empire is for gods, not men. Babylon lost its king. The empire descended into chaos. Generals who once knelt before Alexander now tore the land like vultures pecking at a fallen god. Alexander's infant son, Alexander IV, was reduced to a political pawn. His mother, Roxana, locked in a tower, like a prisoner with a crown. Olympias would not stay silent. She returned to the game, one letter at a time, one ally, one spider thread spun across the ashes. She waited. She declared, Alexander lives. He lives in his son, and I am keeper of that soul. No one dared openly oppose her, but step by step, deaths, disappearances, betrayals, revealed one truth. Olympias had returned, not as a mother, but as the successor, the shadow. While men fought for thrones with oaths and blades, Olympias chose silence and blood. She didn't mount a horse or shout on battlefields. She sat in a gray stone room beside a fading map, whispering enemy names like a serpent sliding across stone. The first was Cassander, son of Antipater, the man who once said, "Women belong in the kitchen, not the court." Cassander vanished from politics for days, not because he died, but because he realized survival meant pretending he never existed. Olympias didn't act out of revenge. She fought to protect the last drop of Alexander's blood. Roxana and the child, held captive. Olympias used every trick to free them. Once, she even sent a box with a dead cat to the guards, a warning. No one dared open the second box. She punished traitors not by killing them, but by leaving them ruined, poor, shamed, abandoned, so they'd understand. Death is mercy. I am not a god. I am the mother of one, and mothers do not forgive. One by one, the generals bowed. The nobles who laughed at Alexander's death now whispered her title, regent, queen in the shadows. Her hands were soaked in blood, but they never shook. Cassander returned, no longer the young soldier avoiding her gaze, but a wolf, older, sharper, ready to bite the past. He tore away all pretense. No more negotiations. He declared, Olympias is a threat, not because she bore Alexander, but because she believes she is Alexander. Then came the counterattack, not by soldiers, but by former allies who now turned away. One night, the palace guards were replaced. A trusted servant disappeared. At the hallway's end, someone left a message in burnt charcoal. I once served Alexander. Now, I serve the living. Olympias understood. Not her son's empire was crumbling, but her own era. Cassander didn't kill her immediately. He paraded her before the public, not to execute, but to humiliate. She, who once made kingdoms tremble with a glance, was led like an old animal. No crown, no cloak, only the ice in her eyes, her last possession. Cassander asked, "Any last words?" She replied, "Yes. When they speak of Alexander, they will ask, 'Who was his mother?' And at that moment, you will die again, Cassander." She wasn't tried. No charges, no defense. Cassander simply threw her to the mob. A crowd was unleashed into the courtyard, not bearing justice, only sticks, stones, and unrelated hatred. She stood among them, didn't beg, didn't scream. She only smiled. A smile that made even those who hated Alexander feel small. "I am the mother of your empire. Now go ahead. Do what you do best. Kill an old woman." And they did. No one wanted to strike first, until a boy threw the first stone, and cowardice found its voice. Dozens, then hundreds of blows rained down, not from hate, but fear. Fear of being next, a trial with no judge, a death with no killer. She didn't fall immediately. Olympias, mother of a god, died slowly, as if even fate couldn't bear to end her too soon. When she finally lay down, face to the sky, eyes still open, Cassander approached. He didn't look at her out of respect, but because he knew. He had killed something that could never be buried. Olympias died. No statues, no mourning, no chronicles, only a cold, empty place in the heart of an empire that had just lost its final mother. Cassander buried her in an unmarked grave. No stone, no name. He thought that was enough to erase her. But every time someone says, "Alexander," a question echoes like a voice in a tomb. Who was his mother? And though no one answers, everyone knows. Alexander IV, her grandson, was quietly murdered years later. The empire shattered into 5 pieces. Generals who once bowed to Olympias tore at each other like wild dogs. And Cassander, he ruled Macedonia, but was never truly called king. Because in everyone's hearts, that throne had already been buried with a white-haired woman whose eyes had never known fear. They don't tell many stories about Olympias because she's too hard to accept. A woman who didn't ask history's permission to enter. She kicked the door down. If Alexander was the world's great conqueror, Olympias was the shadow that raised the flame, then burned with it, leaving a permanent scorch in the veins of history. And then, silence. Olympias was gone. Alexander vanished. Only history remained, crouching in a dark corner, exhausted by human ambition. But history, though torn and bleeding, still breathes. It does not die. It only changes shape. From the stormy winds of Macedonia, we now drift to an island in the Mediterranean, where there are no queens, only goddesses, no assassins, only hands dipped in red ochre like blood. A place called Knossos, where walls remember secrets, where labyrinths don't just lose you, they keep you. Now close your eyes. Take a deep breath. You're about to enter another chapter, one with no swords, no crowns, only fragrance, tears, and truths painted in color. Do you believe there once was a civilization without walls? No wars, no spears, no blood-stained monuments, only frescoes of dolphins leaping along palace walls, women with curly hair dancing in circles, and a massive labyrinth where no one knows where it begins or ends. Knossos, a city on the island of Crete, where people had multi-story homes, plumbing, and festivals, while Egypt was still busy stacking up pyramids. That civilization is called the Minoans, not a name they gave themselves, but one given by later generations, after a myth that spoke of a king named Minos. We don't actually know what they called themselves, because they wrote in a script called Linear A, which, to this day, remains undeciphered. A civilization without a voice, without a history book, just colors, patterns, pottery, and a half-man, half-bull monster trapped in a maze. See what I mean? It's too beautiful. So beautiful. It's suspicious. Archaeologists uncovered over 1,000 interconnected rooms. No clear corridors, no main gate. Spiral staircases, zigzagging hallways, overlapping doorways like a three-dimensional riddle. If it were you, what would you call it? Brilliant architecture? Or organized madness? Imagine living there. You wake up, walk down a stone corridor. On your left, a wall painted with lotus blossoms. On your right, a bare-chested snake goddess, and you have no idea whether you're heading to the dining room, the bedroom, or a place of sacrifice. Knossos felt like a dream you have during a mild fever. Gorgeous, disorienting, and quietly whispering that you don't belong here. But it was real. It existed. And like all beautiful dreams, it vanished. You know the strangest thing about Knossos? No defensive walls, no trenches, no moats. A city in the middle of the Mediterranean, laying its heart bare under the sun, daring the god of war to come and destroy it. The Minoans didn't build like frightened people. They built like the world was their friend. Their walls featured dolphins, not warriors. Their courtyards were for dancing, not parading armies. They had no emperors, no statues celebrating slaughter. They had dancers, potters, beekeepers, and an economy flowing with wine, olive oil, and hand-painted pottery. Imagine living in a world where violence isn't the first answer, where you don't train to shoot arrows, but learn to somersault over bulls in sacred rituals, where you don't recite war declarations, but read the tides to know when the fish will come, where you dream not of thrones, but of turquoise-glazed pots blooming with painted vines. If you were a Greek from the mainland, you'd look at Knossos and think, this is paradise. But if you were a conqueror, you'd think, easy prey. That is the tragedy of gentleness. The more beautiful and refined a civilization is, the less it knows how to wield a blade, and the more likely it is to be crushed beneath someone else's history. Knossos learned that too late. When the Mycenaeans came from the Greek mainland, bringing bronze swords, war chariots, and eyes like hardened steel, the Minoans only had dolphins. You can't stab through armor with a dolphin. Their collapse didn't happen in a day. It came slowly, wave by wave, like the sea quietly pulling back from the shore, gentle and merciless. By the time they realized, the labyrinth had closed, and no one stood outside holding the thread. There's one thing the Minoans never questioned. The divine was female. Not a thunder god, not a bearded king in the clouds. A goddess, gentle-faced, bare-breasted, snakes wrapped around her arms, standing calmly amidst life as though she belonged to it. She didn't rule with lightning. She didn't need to kill to prove her divinity. She simply stood there, among festivals, harvests, and spring rains, and the Minoans believed that was enough. Why were women at the center of everything? Maybe because Knossos didn't worship brute strength. They believed in circles, in cycles, in returning seasons, in birth, not conquest, in embrace, not domination. Women danced in rituals. Women dominated the frescoes. Women ran temples, managed agriculture, and perhaps even the cities. There's no evidence of a Cleopatra-like queen, but neither is there a single proud king carved in stone. Only her. Many forms, always the center. A civilization where power meant life, not death. You can see it in every mural. No violence, only flowers, dolphins, bulls, dancers. No giant temples, but open architecture, natural ventilation, and stairways that led to peace, not palaces. Sounds like a dream, doesn't it? But that was the Minoan worldview. No above or below. Only rhythm. Only return. Until the rhythm broke. One day, the goddess stopped smiling. No more festivals. No more flowers on altars. And when she went silent, the labyrinth began to crack, as though the earth itself was grieving. An empire born from a divine dance, vanished like the dream she once spun. Everyone knows the myth. A Greek boy named Theseus kills a bull-headed monster in a maze. A princess named Ariadne gives him a thread. A tale of courage, cleverness, and love. A legend repeated until its edges dull. But no one asks, why a monster? Why a bull? Why a labyrinth? The maze wasn't made to trap. Originally, it celebrated the cycle, a structure symbolizing return, a journey in and back out, like a heartbeat, like harvest seasons. Bulls, in Minoan culture, weren't beasts to slay. They were sacred. Bull leaping was a ritual, where humans and nature met not to destroy, but to understand. So where did the Minotaur come from? Not Knossos, from the Greeks. From a world that defined history through war, where monsters were excuses for looting, where anything foreign became frightening. The Minotaur was a justification. We had to kill. It was a monster. No one told that Knossos once thrived with art, with peace instead of guns, with light instead of steel. Did the Minotaur exist? It doesn't matter. What truly existed was fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of a culture we couldn't control. Fear of beauty that needed no violence. And fear of our own shadow. Maybe that's why the labyrinth never leaves us. Not as a prison for monsters, but as the place where monsters are born. When we stop seeking the exit and start running in circles inside our fear. Knossos didn't fall to armies. No invasion crossed the sea. No sword pierced its heart. Just a tremor, deep and quiet, like someone tapping a bone in the earth's spine. The Thera volcano erupted, over 100 kilometers away, but its force felt like the gods had sneezed on the Mediterranean. We don't know if Knossos died from that eruption, but no one dares to rule it out. Ash blanketed the sky. Tsunamis crashed into ports. Toxic air seeped into wells, killing crops before they bloomed. No one died by blade. They died from not being able to breathe, from watching the earth go dry, from watching fish disappear from the nets. And when the dust cleared, the Minoans were no longer Minoan. Maybe they fled. Maybe they were absorbed. Maybe they were forgotten. Or worse, remembered wrongly. Because then came the Mycenaeans, the warrior civilization of mainland Greece. They didn't leap with bulls. They carried spears. They built walls. They wrote history in blood. Knossos, once a real city, became scenery for legend, retold by the sword of the survivor. The fall of Minoan society wasn't epic. No hero's last stand. Just rooftops collapsing under ash. Women who once danced in the plaza, quietly folding clothes, holding their children's hands, and walking away from a city that no longer remembered its own name. No one built a grave for a dance. No one searched for the memories of a civilization that didn't write with victories. Only sea wind through ruined walls remains, and someone, centuries later, walking among the rubble and asking, "What was this place?" When we think of labyrinths, we think of myth. When we think of Knossos, we think of minotaurs, Ariadne, and thread. But no one wonders, who built these walls? Not kings, not gods, but nameless workers. Hands that were never carved in stone. Rough palms that carried bricks up steps, set them down, tapped them once for strength, then disappeared behind the plaster like they never existed. They didn't care who the labyrinth would trap. They just knew. If one brick was off, the whole thing would fall. So they stayed quiet, and it was that silence that kept the labyrinth standing for 1,000 years. Knossos wasn't a city. It was a tapestry without edges, spun like the dream of a civilization unafraid of symmetry. Windows caught the wind. Hallways invited the sun. Floors of terracotta clay didn't endure soldiers' boots. They carried dancers' feet. Some say it was the first city of light. Maybe even the last city not defined by violence. No fortresses, no locked gates. Only mazes, not to trap, but to lead to the center, where an altar stood, where people didn't arrive to conquer, but to bow their heads. They built to live, not to defend. And so, when disaster came, they couldn't fight. Because a city that doesn't know how to kill, doesn't know how to survive. The last builder to leave Knossos probably didn't know what they were leaving behind. Just that their hands were tired, their eyes were dim, and the final wall stood. They withdrew like shadows, leaving their creation to the wind. History forgot their names. But if you go to Knossos today, place your palm on a stone. You might still feel the warmth from a hand that left it there 3,000 years ago. When Knossos stopped breathing, there were no trumpets, no funeral bells, only silence, thick and still, like a blanket tucked over a sleeping child. But they knew. They knew the crops wouldn't return. They knew the fish were gone. They knew the light had changed, no longer clear, but yellowed like a bruise in the sky. So they began to leave, not because they were weak, but because they understood. Their civilization wasn't made for war. It was made for light. And when the oil runs out, light does not scream. It simply dims. The woman who once danced in the square now balanced bundles on her head, leading her child. The priest carried parchment, not for prophecy, but to kindle fire on the road. The potter left the wheel behind, as if promising to return, though knowing they wouldn't. No one locked the door. Knossos wasn't sealed. It was forgotten. And the light? Maybe they took it with them, not in lamps, but in memory. Wherever they went, no one believed they'd come from a labyrinth with hundreds of rooms, with plumbing, with stone floors like dreams. They were seen as wanderers, people who once were, but now were only frayed clothes, distant accents, and empty stares. But they carried something that could never be stolen, a belief that people could live without killing, a belief that buildings could be prayers, not prisons. A belief that in a maze, one doesn't get lost, but finds oneself. No one writes history for those who leave. History remembers the conqueror, the flag raiser, the one who stays. But if you listen closely, in the wind sliding through the ruins of Knossos, you can still hear footsteps, not of those fleeing, but of those who knew. To keep the light alive, sometimes you must choose to step into the dark. Have you ever stood before a massive, ancient cracked stone wall, placed your hand on it, and wondered, what screams of death did this place once hear? Sounds a bit intense, doesn't it? But the truth is, walls are never silent. They remember. They crack. They crumble. And sometimes, if you're patient enough to listen, you'll feel the screams trapped for thousands of years. The sounds of people who believed they were being protected, only to be buried alive by that very belief. History calls it ancient siege warfare. Sounds epic, strategic. In history books, it's clean. City A fell in year XYZ thanks to brilliant generals and superior weapons. But what the books don't tell you is this. The first clack of a falling brick wasn't the sound of victory. It was the warning bell of a world tearing open. Not by bullets or bombs, but by hunger, betrayal, and despair. No one teaches you that, in ancient times, sometimes the first casualty in a siege was hope. Imagine this. You're a child living inside the city. Every day, you pass through the gates. The guards nod at you, and the towering walls feel like warm, reliable parents. You kick stones along the base, scribble doodles on the bricks. You think, as long as the walls are here, I'm safe. Then one day, from the outside, a whoosh pierces the air. A flaming arrow sails over the wall. A water well is poisoned. That night, the guards don't nod. They growl, tremble, thirst, and dare not sleep. And you, the child who once thought the walls were a mother, suddenly realize mothers don't have arms to hold you when the sky collapses. That wasn't the beginning of war. It was the end of an illusion. We build homes to shelter from rain. The ancients built fortresses to shelter from fear. Now imagine living 3,000 years ago. Out there, mountains, forests, open fields, and people who don't want you to exist. No police, no phones, no social security. At night, the only thing between you and a murderous band of strangers is a wall. Ancient cities weren't just places to live. They were declarations. We are not easily devoured. Every brick was a fragment of fear. Every watchtower, a never-blinking eye. Every gate, a reminder that safety must be earned. From Sumer to Egypt, Greece to China, walls rose like roots of titanic trees erupting from the earth. Not because people liked confinement, but because what lurked outside was more terrifying than being trapped inside. Wars, grudges, or failed harvests turning neighbors into enemies. Walls marked the line between us and them, between order and chaos, between living and soon not. The world's first cities didn't have supermarkets, but they had moats, guards, gates that sealed tight each night. And if you had no good reason, you didn't get in. A city was a living organism. Its skin was stone, its immune system, arrows. But every body has a weakness, and every wall has a crack. People built fortresses out of fear. But fear has a strange magnetism. It attracts those who dare to challenge it. As if the moment you raise a wall, the world asks, can it fall? In movies, sieges happen fast. In real life, they're slow, dirty, and test your patience more than winter bread dough. You can't just charge into a city surrounded by 10-meter stone walls, moats, hidden traps, and raining arrows. Instead, it becomes a game of who breaks first. And this game comes in many forms. Version 1, starvation siege, cut off food, burn crops, poison wells, sit outside, drink wine, and wait for their screams. It's not war, it's cannibalism via patience. Version 2, psychological warfare, hang captured soldiers at the gate, parade prisoners around the walls every morning, send anonymous notes like, your king feasts, do your wives and children? No blade needed, just corrosion of the soul. Version 3. Breach the wall. Dig trenches. Burn gates. Deploy siege engines like towers as tall as the walls, catapults heavy as wagons, giant fire-resistant battering shields on wheels. All this to move a few meters before boiling oil rains from above and flames swallow your progress. Ancient siege warfare wasn't about stabbing. It was about testing who crumbles first, the stone or the mind. Outside, enemies dig tunnels for months. Inside, people dig toilets because water ran out. The outer forces kill. But inside, they die of diarrhea, malnutrition, and despair. The best siege tactic isn't to strike the gate. It's to strike time. Because in the end, it's not bricks that collapse. It's the will of those behind them. The gate, thought to be the strongest part, is actually the city's nose. Small, sensitive, and easy to break. You can build a wall 20 meters high and 5 meters thick. But the gate still has to open, and anything with hinges can be broken. That's why the gate takes the first blows. Attackers use battering rams, huge iron-tipped logs, pounding like debt collectors. Some set the gate on fire. Some smear grease on it before setting it on fire so it burns better. Others tunnel from the side and shove the gate down altogether. Defenders pour boiling water on the ram crews. Drop rocks, wood, even dried human feces. Erect barricades behind the gate. Sometimes they fake surrender, open the gate to lure in the enemy, then trap and slaughter them. The problem: the gate is also the only exit. When a city falls, people rush toward it like ants from a frying pan. But if the gate is jammed, you die in the stampede before a sword ever touches you. And if the enemy seizes the gate, they open it from the inside, like your own guts betraying you. A city may still stand, but once the gate's broken, the massacre begins. There's a saying, strong walls keep enemies out. But here's the truth. No wall is tall enough if someone inside opens the door. In history, traitors weren't always outside the gate. They were often in the war room. A general bribed, a courtier with a grudge, a starving citizen who believes maybe the enemy will spare us. Examples? 1187. Jerusalem fell, not due to weak walls, but because the people lost faith in their leaders. Babylon once fell because a guard forgot to lock the side gate. Some Greek cities fell after citizens welcomed disguised allies who turned out to be the enemy. The real weakness of a wall isn't stone. It's the heart that guards it. Walls don't betray. People do. And sometimes, the traitor thinks they're doing the right thing. They open the gate to end the war. They surrender to save lives. But the price? The city is looted, women enslaved, books burned, and their names etched into history, not as heroes, but as those who sold their soul. The strongest fortress is not the wall itself, but the unity of the people inside. Now imagine a city besieged for 21 years. Not 21 days, not 21 weeks, 21 years. This really happened. Veii, a powerful Etruscan city near Rome, was surrounded from 405 to 396 BCE. No catapults, no chariots, just time. Slow, patient, deadly. The Romans built an entire temporary city outside of Veii, just to wait. Cut water, burn crops. Not even a rat could escape. Inside? First, you believe rescue is coming. Then you burn books for firewood. Then you eat shoe leather. Then, you stop burying the dead and start seeing them as food. More people died of starvation than arrows. Children stopped crying because they had no strength left. Death didn't strike. It gnawed. In year 20, Veii still stood, which means children were born, grew up, and died inside the siege, without ever knowing the outside world. Finally, the Romans dug a tunnel under the wall, and one day they rose from the earth like demons. No drumbeat, no gate breached. Just one morning, the enemy was already inside. Veii didn't fall from battle. It collapsed from exhaustion. Think siege is all swords and fire? You're forgetting the deadliest weapon of all. Words, lies, promises, oaths of honor. In the ancient world, cities fell, not because their walls failed, but because they believed in sweet promises laced with poison. We only want to negotiate. If you surrender, your people will be safe. We swear on the highest God. Then the gates opened, horses entered, wine flowed, and after midnight, the city turned to ash. You think those were the tricks of the wicked? No, they were military tactics, taught, rehearsed. The ultimate move: win without fighting, make the enemy give up their own weapons. The masterpiece: conquer a city and still wear a robe of virtue. The Romans once said, "Every promise is a blade." The Greeks went further. They made a statue, a giant wooden horse, into the greatest lie in history, the Trojan horse. It's no coincidence that historians recorded ancient negotiations, because words were the first arrows aimed at the heart. Sometimes, a city falls not when walls break, but when trust does. Think the cruelest part was storming the gate? Wrong. Cruelty began after the walls fell. Then soldiers weren't bound by discipline. No more orders, no more limits. Only years of hunger, rage, and pain. Now unleashed like a flood of blood, and it drenched everything. Some cities were burned to the ground overnight, not for strategy, but to make a point, to say, this is the price of resistance. Some were stripped bare, gold cups, wedding belts, because the spoils weren't trophies, they were humiliation. Some saw men killed even after surrender. Women divided like rations. Children thrown from the walls, not because they were threats, but because no one wanted them growing up to seek revenge. No one builds hell better than an army let loose after victory, because nothing is more terrifying than someone with a sword who thinks they can do anything and face no consequences. When history mentions great sieges, it rarely tells what happened after the gates opened. No one records who was burned alive, whose blood was boiled into courage elixirs. History calls it end of campaign. Truth is, war doesn't end when the flag rises. It ends when no one's left to tell the story. The names of generals get carved in stone. The names of those who climbed walls and broke gates get swallowed by dirt. Then rain. In every epic, you'll read, the army charged with courage. They fought valiantly for 3 days. The city finally fell. But you won't read the name of the first man who was stabbed climbing the ladder. The old soldier crying when he recognized his son among the enemy ranks. The blacksmith dragged from his forge to hold a shield where the wall cracked. Ancient war had many heroes, but most were nameless. Not because they lacked greatness, but because they weren't nobles with historians to write their tales. They were the soldier who slipped on a friend's corpse, the mother who hid her child in a grain basket and was buried alive, the hornblower who kept blowing with only one lung left. History doesn't deny them. It just didn't have time to remember. Because when a city is taken, what people want is the general's name, to build statues, to sing songs, while those who became the staircase to victory live only in wind dust, and whispers. They are the smallest cuts in the grand surgery of history. And you know, no one remembers the scalpel, only the one who held it. Have you ever stood at an ancient ruin? A broken wall, a shattered gate, a moat, now choked with weeds, and asked, who once lived here? Every city has a last day. Not every city has someone who remembers. Some were once centers of power, now playgrounds for tree roots and stray cats. Some gates once closed before 10,000 cavalry, now swing open for the wind. Some rooms once echoed with schemes, blood, and oaths, now echo only with sunlight through cracks. The siege ends, but the city does not die. It simply changes form. It lives again, through slanted bricks, through strange scratches that an archaeologist wonders, was this a mark from an arrow? Through a rusted bracelet dug from layer 27. Perhaps once worn by a girl waiting for someone who never returned. Not everyone can read the language of stone, but everyone can feel the sorrow of a place once filled with voices, now silent. And if you stand there long enough, eyes closed, you might hear panicked footsteps on stone, screams dissolving into smoke, and even laughter, tiny, like memories refusing to leave. That's when you understand. Siege warfare didn't just destroy buildings. It fractured memory. And only time, a lot of time, can stitch it back together. Dear listener, if you've made it this far, then you've journeyed with us through 4 stories. Textbooks rarely tell. An assassin whose name was lost. A powerful mother rewritten by history as a madwoman. A city twisted by the very light of its civilization. And stones that whisper of battles no bard ever sang. We didn't seek conquerors. We sought the shattered human pieces left behind. History, as you've seen, is not a smooth stream of truth. It's a swamp, where feet sink, memories scatter, and legends are born from silence. And when you hear those lost voices, see those unnamed eyes, you'll understand. History isn't just the past. It's the shadow it still casts over our dreams each night.